Savvy marketers are now turning to the cognitive sciences to understand exactly how the brain works and leveraging that knowledge to forge conscious and subconscious connections with consumers. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk and hear how to create truly iconic brands.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jallis.
Today's guest, Sandeep Dayal, is a seasoned marketing and strategy leader and serves as a counselor to C-suite executives and board members at Global 500 companies in markets around the world. His new book, Branding Between the Ears, Using Cognitive Science to Build Lasting Consumer Connections, is what we're going to be talking about. Welcome to the show, Sandeep.
I'm so happy to be here, Rob. How are you today?
I'm feeling good. Let's get to work. You ready?
Let's go.
Can you handle a Jallis? I think so.
I am going to try.
Right. Okay. Well, then let me come out of the gate with this one. It's not that I'm old school, but what's wrong with the old ways of branding? You seem to be moving down a new avenue there. What's wrong with the old ways?
Yeah, I think it's not just what is wrong with it. It's just that we're learning more, and that when we learn more, we better use what we're learning, right? So branding, if you will, used to be all about product differentiation, which kind of made sense, Rob, right? You said, hey, here's my product, here's your product, here's how my product is different, and therefore I'm going to put those differences, a whole list of those differences in my branding, right? I kind of call that list branding. But the problem is that often doesn't work. And you know how bad we are with lists. Somebody tells you, hey, go to the grocery store and buy these 5 things. You're going to forget 3 of those by the time you get there, right? So you cannot do branding in the way that it has actually been done. And the good news is that we are learning a lot more about the things that do work well with the human brain. It's not that our brain can't remember things, right? We watch a 2-hour movie, we go to Forrest Gump, we watch the whole movie, we understand the whole plot. We can come back and tell somebody that whole story, right? So the brain is very much capable of doing extraordinary things, but we have to work. We have to make our brands work the way our brain does. And we haven't done that in the past.
Well, that makes sense. I went to your website and I saw an interesting quote up there. You said, your brand is what people's brains make of it.
Yeah.
I like that. Put some thought behind that. Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah. So, let's think about our relationships with people, and then we'll talk about relationships with brands. So when you think about our relationships with people, really what you're talking about is your perception of people, right? Which means that we know that there's more to people than what meets the eye. And it's kind of, they have their soul, they have their personality and all of those things. And brands are very similar. So when people see your products, when they see your brands, they know there's something more. The brain automatically knows there's something more. And that something more, which you can call the aura of the product, you can call it the soul of the brand, whatever you want to call it, that something else is what that is. And because it is imperceptible, it is kind of an impression in people's mind, it is hard for other people to replicate it. It is hard for other brands to replicate it, just as it's hard for other people to replicate their personality to yours, right?
Right.
So that is why it is so powerful to understand what is that perception that really is being formed. Everything that we sense through our 5 senses, what we see, what we smell, what we taste, all of those different things ultimately get processed in our brain, right between our ears, right? So that is exactly what we're talking about. What is that processing that goes on there? What are those impressions that are made inside our brain? Because that is what branding is all about.
Yeah. I remember my first real good lesson in branding was when I wrote my first book, and that was back in '93. And I, with a big smile, said, when they said, now, who is this book written for? I said, everybody. I've cracked the code. I have a book that's for everybody. And the 5th time I got, we're not interested, I started going back and going, to me, it's one of those examples I call instinct versus logic.
Yeah.
What you're saying is very logical, but instinctively, a lot of times we make certain mistakes like that one of not, what I was basically saying was, I have a book for everyone, which means I have a book for no one. I have no real branding, and yet real instinctive, but not logical.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we all experience that, right? When we hear somebody tell us something that we've been struggling to understand, and then someone says it in a particular way, then we say, "Oh, now that you put it that way, I totally get it," right? And that's
Right.
the whole thing, which is branding is what you say, which is you can't go to somebody and say, "Yeah, I'm everything." You know, you've got to understand how to make that special connection with that person, because unless you put it that way, unless you make that connection, they're just not going to get it. And then
Yeah.
you are, you are everything but nothing,
Right.
kind of the
Right. I do an interesting little exercise, particularly pre-pandemic, with new authors when they say, well, I got this book, it's about this and that. And I tell them, go to the bookstore and go find the book that's closest to your book.
Yeah.
And it's a really neat exercise because they'll come back and go, self-help, general business. They
Yeah.
begin to get it.
Yeah.
But it's an exercise and at least trying to find a home, because I guarantee you it isn't in 4 different areas.
Yeah.
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 So it's a classic example. Give me some other examples of some old branding methods that in your mind are no longer effective. And I hope everybody's listening to this right now, because I have a series of questions I created. This I'm sheepishly telling you, this was one of my favorites, because a lot of times in the world of training, we refer to ourselves as being unconsciously incompetent, meaning
Yeah.
a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. So
Right.
give us a
Right.
couple.
Sure, sure. Yes, I mean, there are a number of things. So one that I already shared with you is this whole idea of list branding, which
Right.
actually doesn't work, which is what most marketers try to do. They try to make all the list of these things, which their brand is different on, but just the human mind is not wired for remembering lists or registering lists, right? So that's one
Okay.
right there. The second one, which I mentioned in my book, and there are actually a whole bunch of them, and we don't need to go through all of them, but I'll go through this one, which is around over emotionalizing your brand. So what happened was that, this is more than about 12 years back or so, Mark Gobi had written this book around emotional branding. And then everybody jumped onto that brand wagon, and they said, "Oh, you know what? In my commercials, I've got to make things emotional, because that's how people will remember my brand." And there is some truth to that, which is when you do it in the right way, when there are some emotions attached to your message, that message will tend to stay longer in your brain. So there is that. However, just arbitrarily emotionalizing things doesn't work. So one of the things that has been discovered in the field of psychology is that when you have especially a negative emotional thing, so when you have stories that make you cry and so on, and sort of expose you through that angst, then what happens is that your attention goes totally on the emotions of that story. And in the context of that, the consumer can forget to hear your brand message. So your brand message becomes sort of an unimportant side thing, and that whole emotional story becomes the main thing. So
Right.
that is where over emotionalizing your brands can really hurt you. So emotionalizing, you have to really understand how that works. Similarly, sex, when people go and use sex in their commercials and so on, people will remember that whole sexual scene and all of that stuff, or that super hot model and everything, but they don't remember your brand. So what's the point, right?
Right.
So in all of these cases, we have to understand just where that whole thing fits and what is that thought pattern that we're going after, which is what becomes the main focus in doing what I call cognitive branding.
Right. And which makes complete sense. Let's see if our two worlds can cross for a second. So I want to take you into the sales world, and you hold on to your world and tell me if we're meeting somewhere in the middle. One of the things that in my world that we're always trying to get our clients off of, which is to show clients the need. In other words, this is what you need. This is you need to have your teeth whitened. That's
Mhm.
what you need. Look at the pretty model with white teeth.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, from a sales perspective, we think they completely missed the boat when they say that. We'd rather show them the problem, not the
Mhm.
need,
Mhm.
because a small percentage of people are going to see that and go, you know what? I was just at the dentist. They were talking to me about my teeth. That's just what I need to buy. But the other 80% of the people are saying, well, I don't smile a whole lot, and I don't really know the impact that might be having on me bonding with my clients. In other words, more people can associate with the problem than the need. So on websites, things like that. And I don't really get into designing people's websites, but from a marketing standpoint, I'm always trying to push the marketers to stop showing your solution.
Yeah.
Show the problem. You can show it, you don't have to scare them, but
Yeah.
they'll identify more with that. Am I on base with this?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is, and that is, I won't say that's the only thing, but that's one of the key things that is there. And really, and let me give you a few, examples around that, and then we can work our way from there. So what you're talking about is, what other people call like the pain point, helping to understand what the pain point is. But the key thing about the understanding the problem and understanding the pain point is that you have to understand what is going on inside the head of that person, right? What is their pain point, right? That is when you actually zero in on what they feel is their pain point. That is when they start to understand what you're saying. That's when they start paying attention to you, right? So that's the key thing that I talk about in my book, which is that what happens is that when you go through life, you're buying products all the time and so on. So out of, by the time you're whatever, 30 years old or 40 years, you've had millions of these interactions. And every time you're learning something, right? It's not that, I bought a car, I bought, Kellogg's cornflakes. I think, every time you're learning something and your brain is forming these rules, and those rules get biochemically burnt into your brain, right? This is your wisdom from life. And whenever you're selling to somebody, if you can connect to the wisdom that they have in their life, because those are their deep set beliefs, then you're going to make more headway. And let me give you an example in the selling situation. So for example, a lot of work that we do is in the pharmaceutical area. And when you go to doctors, and we're trying to, convince doctors to prescribe our clients drugs and so on, right? And doctors get, a gazillion of these sales guys come in and talk to them about, my drug is this, it's better in these 3 ways. And then another guy walks in and my drug is better in this way. And then, this is going on all day, So what these doctors do to make their lives easier is that they have certain mental rules that they follow in treating patients. So for example, one of the rules that we discovered for some patients when we were working in the whole arena of rheumatoid arthritis and so on is that some physicians have this whole thing of, hey, if someone walks in and they have a particular disease, then I'm going to just step up my treatment one by one. I'm going to try one thing, but I'm not going to try the strongest thing. I'm going to try the weakest thing first. If that works, I'm done. If not, then I have another thing up my sleeve. And then I'm going to try that. And then I'm going to try this, so they work like that. So their rule is keep something up your sleeve always. Other physicians will have exactly the opposite rule, Rob. They will say, if you walk in with that, I'm going to hit this thing with everything in the kitchen sink, right? Because I want to just hit it full on and, put it to bed, kill it right away, right? So These are two very different. So when you're talking to the physician, you want to be able to understand what is the rule that's in there, because you're not going to change their mind about their rules because they've made those rules over hundreds of such interactions, right? So you want to be just make sure that, okay, if this is the kitchen sink, hit it with the kitchen sink, then I'm going to talk this way. If this is the guy that wants to go step by step, then I'm going to hit it this way, right? So that helps you connect with that person. Otherwise, you're talking this way and that guy's talking this way. Understand this person's modality, right, is the main thing.
Right. Well, nice of you to step into our world of selling there. Just for the record, Lilly Pharmaceutical and Bristol Myers Squibb have been clients of mine over the years. So I do sales train a lot of the pharmaceutical reps.
There you go.
And I know exactly what you're saying. I actually always claim that the good ones might not have very good vision forward, but they can see 2020 walking backwards, because that's frequently the length of time they have with the doctor to pitch their product. And what a shame, because you just stated it, but I'll repeat it. what a ridiculous use of time, by the way, to pitch a product. What we really teach them is give them a compelling reason to find another time to set a time aside so we can ask the questions and listen, so we can do exactly what you just said and incorporate two of my favorite words in selling, which are you said. I love when I not only bring a product to the table, but I'm going to say, and that will address this piece, which you said was important to you the last time we spoke. If I'm not asking questions and I'm just trying to dump like 3 or 4 features on the table, yeah, I'm just another vendor wasting a doctor's time.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, those 2 words, which is acknowledging what they said, is the way of sort of tapping into saying, okay, I understand, this is the way that you work. Now let me see how what I'm selling fits in with the way that you work, and those things are a little important. Now that doesn't mean that sometimes you do have to change people's minds because they work in a certain way and you want them to work in a completely different way, and that's okay. But that's a harder climb. So I do tell my when I'm doing the branding with people, and I also work on the selling side, where I said, look, if you can get away with the way they already think, then you should go that way. But if that's not an option for you, then yes, there are things that you can do to start changing their minds.
Right. Now, I'm going to remind you, because I know you did your homework on me, but I will remind you that I did write the book, How to Change Minds. So that's one of my little areas there. But you're absolutely right. There's a process involved there. And to me, that's why I truly love talking to marketing people, because it's almost like when I sold for Xerox, there was sales and service, and we didn't seem to want to be talking to each other. Well, the good reps taught me immediately, that's going to be your best friend, that service person. The clients talk to them. Again, with sales and marketing, a lot of times they tend to want to instinctively keep us apart. And my goodness, we should be absolutely in lockstep with each other. I want to know what you're doing, and I want you to know what I'm doing, so we're speaking the same language. And not as often as I like, but throughout my career, I've always offered, when I put on a workshop, and I'm heading out for a 2-day workshop tomorrow, but when I do a workshop, I always offer a few free seats to the marketing team, and which come in with their arms folded. We don't really want to hear this, but we can, once we connect the message, and you can see how in line we are, and we're from 2 different camps, we go from there. But isn't it a shame that they want to sort of stay on their own island?
No, I think those things have to connect together, because you have to speak with one voice. And next time you're doing one of those sessions in Chicago, give me a seat too.
Okay. You're in Chicago?
Yes, I am in Chicago.
That used to be that was a big hotspot for me, because I work with a lot in the financial industry. So I was down that loop or whatever it was. The only thing I learned about that loop was I could leave at 2 a.m, 4 a.m, 10 a.m, 2 p.m. I never, ever was spared a traffic jam coming in or out of that city of yours. But all right, I still love the city. Don't worry. Now, let me shift you over to something else that I saw that you that I cherry picked from you, and that is consumer attention. And I believe that you're saying it may be longer than we think it is. I've always clung to, because it's a good line in a seminar, the old goldfish has a longer attention span than we have. Now, it gets a smile. It does what I want in the seminar, but it breaks my heart at the same time. Talk to me about that. Is our attention span going up? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think our attention spans have always been longer than we think.
Huh.
I think it is true that, there's more competition, there is more messaging going on, there are more things happening and so on. But we have our conscious attention spans and our subconscious attention spans. And as long as there is something worthwhile, our brain is going to pay attention to it. I think people find that the attention spans are short because often they are not able to put things in the right way. But if you put things in the right way, if you make it interesting, and there are all kinds of techniques there, storylining and, presenting information in the surprise and delight model and so forth, right? So when you do those things, you do get noticed. One of the interesting things you will find is that some of the most interesting commercials, some of the commercials on YouTube that have gotten like 27 million viewers and so on, are commercials that are actually 90 minutes or even 3 minutes long, and like, for example, there was this guy, Mike Dubin, who was the founder for Dollar Shave Club. And he was getting nowhere. His kind of company was near bankruptcy and so on. And then he did this little YouTube video of himself, where he talks about his whole angst around how, men are being made to pay these humongous prices for razor blades, and how you can actually get a better razor blade from him. And, but just the way that he put that video together, he made it a little funny. It was angst filled, and it really captured captures people's attention, if you will. And that one was a 90-second video, and some 27 million people went to see it. So they actually sought out and went to see this video, and they sent it to their friends. So it's not that people are not willing to give you that attention. It's, you have to have that connection. You have to provide it in such a way that it matters.
I'm so grateful that you said that, because I was really clinging to hope here. They've been dragging around that one study, I think it was from the University of Minnesota, about just how sad it was of how much of a lecture was retained the next day, the next week, the next month. But I dug into that study some years ago, and it speaks to what you're speaking about, which is, yeah, they didn't retain a whole lot, 10%, whatever it was. But then again, they were lectured to for an hour. They were just talked to. There was no attention to, well, what did they make visual? What did they allow the student, you mentioned story, what did they do creatively that a professional speaker or a corporate trainer would do when they're battling for that student's attention? And I don't want this to come out the wrong way, which means it's going to come out the wrong way. So you bail me out in a moment, but it's not that I'm beating up the universities. It's that there isn't a ton of motivation there to do those things, because there's a lot of fear-based learning. There's going to be an exam. You're going to need to pass this course to get your diploma to get. But in the real world, there is no diploma. I've got you for a 2-day seminar. So I can't just lean on stepping up to the mic and talking to you and reminding you it's your responsibility to get and retain what we're about to hear. I've got to do that, because that's how I'm going to be graded and judged. So that was my first kind of entry to, I don't think those numbers are quite as bad as everyone says. If I tried my hardest not to get the attention of an audience, yes, it would be like that. But good to hear that. Good to hear that your words.
The second point over there around that whole point of attention is that, all of us have had these aha moments, right? When you're someday, you've got some problem that you've seen and you're struggling with it, but it doesn't make any sense. And then something, a month later, you walk out of the shower and you suddenly have the answer to that problem, right? It comes out of nowhere. Or you wake up one morning and boom, you suddenly see the light. And what does that mean? How does that actually happen? We've all experienced it, but how does it actually happen? It happens because your brain continues to process information subconsciously. Even when you're not consciously, you're not even trying to think about that problem, it is still being processed. And therefore, I make that statement, which is that our subconscious attention spans are a lot longer, sometimes months long or years long, where we process this information and then it comes. So that being said, what you just talked about also is important, which is that we tend to process information in certain forms better, which is when information is in the form of storylines. Like I said, you can watch a 2-hour movie and understand the whole storyline. It's not like you have just a 5-second attention span when you're sitting in a movie, right? You understand the whole movie. You understand things better when there are patterns, when there are rhymes, when there's music, all of these different things are just, for whatever reason, our human brain is wired to process these things better than just, let's say, a list of things. And that's why you need to be creative in your presentation and bring all those things into play.
Well, my brain is really feeling better now hearing you talk about this, and I'm appreciative. I want to get one other point across, and you might have mentioned it, but I just want you to use the term. you stated that cognitive brands are different from traditional brands. Well, the first thing I want to do, I actually Googled it, but the first thing I want you to do is explain what you mean by a cognitive brand, and then go ahead and kind of walk me through why you make that statement.
So there are a couple of pieces to this whole statement. So one is that cognitive brands are brands that work the way our brain does. Okay, and what we are learning is that the way that our brain has to work, or where the way our brands have to work in triggering our brain in the right way, is that they have to serve as keys. Okay, keys that unleash or unlock those past experiences that are stored in our brains, or the fantasies that we have in our brains, because that's what's in our brains, right? I mean, when we say what's in our brain, it's our past experience and our fantasies. Those are the only two things. So when you use your brand to trigger one of those in a positive way, then things work out. Okay, so when we're talking about cognitive brands, in my framework, I break them up into three parts, Rob. So the first part of it is brand vibes, right? So this is where we talk about how does the brand actually make an empathetic connection with the consumer, right? And it could be an empathy-based connection or a values-based connection. And that's why we have these terms, brands with empathy and brands with values. Both of these are terms that don't exist in branding books and business schools, okay? So these are new things, but these are new ways of making connections. The latter, the brands with values, are where you make a connection with the consumer by sharing in the same values that they have, right? Then the other piece of it is the brand sense, which is, does what this brand says, does it make sense from a conscious or subconscious perspective? Right. And we discussed all of the examples around how people can make decisions both consciously and subconsciously. And then the last part is whether your brand has resolved. So what happens is that many times a consumer will say, you know what, everything that you say just makes complete sense to me. But you know what, I'm going to think about it. And that's when they're at a point of indecision or a point of indifference. And that is where you need the third element, which is the brand resolve, which is you need to get people to take action. And interestingly enough, there's been research done by two psychologists at the University of Rochester, who said there are three types of goals that people pursue, just all humans. And it's just three. And those three goals lead people to action. So it's around control and freedom. It's around, accentuating your own identity. And the third one is around building relationships. So freedom, identity, and relationships, those things get us to act. So if you can build those things into branding, then that really helps to make the brands work really well. So that's what these cognitive brands are.
Got it. And the sales trainer guy will jump on this one and just remind you also that that's what the greatest salespeople will do. It's actually, to me, the litmus test between a salesperson and kind of an order taker. Yeah. And I don't mean to be derogatory, but an order taker will figure out what the client wants and go get it for them. Mm-hmm. And a great salesperson ethically will understand what the problem is, create urgency around that problem, so that we take it from a nice to have and a need to a need to have. And then the solution's a little bit easier. And I could spend 2 days on urgency. I won't, but urgency meaning we don't have to wait for a problem to become big to talk about the problem or to visualize the problem. And that's one of the reasons I also believe that it's a shame we don't have more great salespeople, because a doctor fixes you up when you're not feeling well, and a lawyer takes care of legal issues when you don't understand the law. And a salesperson moves you past your fear of change and gets you to fix something before it becomes really big and bad. Everybody will fix something once it becomes a big problem. It takes a skilled individual to help somebody fix it when it's still a small problem.
Yes. And I think it's all about building those relationships, because there are certain products when you're selling them, it's just like a one-time sale.
Yeah.
But for many other products, like, we were talking about the pharmaceutical world, the sales reps are going in and talking to those doctors every week. So you're building those relationships, and that physician is actually forming an opinion about you, not just about, one interaction, but about every interaction that you've had, right? And that's their view of you. And the other thing that I would say here is that whether you are selling, because many of your followers and fans are in the selling world, the brain is the brain. There isn't a different brain that we have for selling and a different brain that we have for branding. It's the same brain. It works in the same way. So some of the ideas that I speak about in my book, even though they are on the specific topic of branding, because again, as we remember, my book cannot be everything for everybody, but nonetheless, those basic principles, people can look back and then say, hey, what would this mean in a selling context? Right? They can ask that question. I don't answer those questions in my book, but your readers can answer them themselves by applying the same frameworks.
Good. All right. Well, so let's finish on that. Let's talk about the book just for a second.
Sure.
First of all, the book came out when, in November?
It was released at the end of December.
Okay, good. And I'm assuming that we can find that on Amazon and most of the online stores.
Everywhere. Yeah, everywhere online. Barnes and Nobles, Walmart, Amazon, all of those places.
Good. Ebook?
There isn't an ebook yet. And there is no, excuse me. There isn't. There is a Kindle edition. Yes, you can get a Kindle. What I was going to say is there isn't an audiobook yet.
Okay. Are you going to do the audiobook yourself when there is?
Probably not. Probably get somebody like you with a voice like yours, I think would be great.
Well, my voice is the voice of a 40-year speaker. It's a little gravelly, but it gets the job done. But appreciate that. I think I'm very happy with the audiobook, but my sales audience tends to like to hear it rather than read it. So, yeah. But I do love a good audiobook. Okay, so let's pull up here. I really enjoyed it. I want you to know, because I don't often get marketing people in here. I wish I did. Because like I said, we need to be in tandem. We need to be on the same team. And that means ethically as well. I know that you write to that, and we do too. When you're changing somebody's mind, when you're moving somebody to something that they hadn't considered, there's an awesome responsibility about intent. Intent being, I'm doing this not for me or my numbers to make the cruise that I'm trying to qualify for. I'm doing it because that's what I would do if I'm in your seat, and I'm going to help you find that and get there. If we do that, I know in sales, if we do that in marketing, then we're really doing our job.
I do think so. And I think people should do what you're doing, which is they should ask that question around ethics. What is the right thing to do themselves, right? Because when you don't do that, then A, you're going to get into trouble at some point, and B, somebody's going to come and then tell you how to do your job, which is not what you want. And in my book, I essentially talk about these three principles. One is the canonical imperative, which is what you just spoke about. Don't do anything that you wouldn't want somebody else to do to you, right? That's the canonical principle. Then the second one is around a categorical imperative, which is don't do anything which, if everybody else also started doing, would be a bad thing for society, right? This comes from Immanuel Kant, who was a famous German philosopher. And then the last one is the sunshine imperative, which is don't do anything which, if published on the front pages of New York Times tomorrow, is going to embarrass you. Right? So
yeah.
Those three simple things. Just ask those questions. If you ever have a doubt, just ask those three simple questions, and you'll do fine.
I like that. I've never heard it articulated that way. Well done. Well, all right. How do people get a hold of you?
So they can go firstly to my author website, which is sandeepdayal.com. And otherwise, they can certainly, I'm happy to take LinkedIn requests. Also find me on LinkedIn and reach out there. And then, of course, there's my book.
Perfect.
Read it.
Okay. And I'm going to remind people, because your name doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. So it's SandeepDayal.com. And I'll have that on our landing page as well. And I'll have all your contact information, your Facebook site, Instagram, LinkedIn. You're busy, Twitter. Oh yeah. You're doing your job. I'm sure a publicist is in your ear, and I'm going to pretend that you came up with all this. Anyway, listen, terrific having you on the show. Very grateful you were able to spend time with us. And thank you so much.
No, likewise, likewise. I really enjoyed this. This was a very natural conversation. You made me think a little bit about some of these things. So that was great to connect it with selling.
Well, perfect. That's one of the nicest compliments you can provide. So thank you. And we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.